it's time for our first speaker, esteemed Sarah Novotny. Sarah is one of the, you could say, one of the first employees at Amazon when like under 400, employee number 400 in 1997. Then went on to do lots of other things in the server management space, has been a board member of the Linux Foundation, been at Google when building the Kubernetes community in the beginning of 2015, and so was part of creating the Cloud Native Computing Foundation, which today underpins essentially all of the server management space in the community, open source community these days, and well, then was one of the kind of office of the CTO people at Microsoft Azure most recently. So give it up for Sarah Novotny.
Thank you, Lucas, and thank you, Aaltoes, for hosting this and all of the different groups that have come together. It is very dear to me when you get multiple communities working together. This may be a surprise if any of you saw this yesterday, or after you hear this talk, it'll also make a lot of sense why I talk a lot about collaboration. So let's make these things go forward. So today I'm going to focus on trust and open source and trusting in open source, trusting software in general, and then also a little bit of how you can build that trust in your communities as you're actually building software. So let's start with the definition that I'm going to use for trust here, which is reliability, truth, and ability of something or someone. So this is a trust in something. This is trust as a noun, and this is the way that we evaluate if something is going to do the things we expect in a timely manner over a period of time and consistently. So you may have noticed, and in fact I suspect some of you have been in this world less long than we've been doing big technology, or even than I've been doing big technology, which is terrifying. But software is everywhere. Everything you touch today involves software. And that is really important because we trust software to drive us to our events in the evening. We trust software to make sure our banking works. We trust software to make sure our airplanes fly. And all of this is really important because A, we like living, B, we like being able to pay our own rent, and C, we want to make sure that the things that we expect happen as it's important. But really, how do you think about trust in this sense? Trust is an agreement between multiple parties. So any API is a contract between two pieces of software. Any interface, any standard, these are contracts. They're not legal contracts, but they certainly are contracts that we need to rely on. So a friend of mine wrote a great book. He actually, I believe, he was part of the founding of the Confidential Computing Consortium. I'm going to get that out poorly. The Confidential Computing Consortium. And he wrote a book about trust in cloud computing. All right, so how many of you have heard security conversations talking about, like, Alice talks to Bob, who talks to Charlie? Okay, you've heard these things. All right. Well, it's usually done with the alphabet so that you know how far you get. So when Mike wrote this book, his introduction moved me incredibly because basically he said, we get halfway through the alphabet before we even talk about a human touching something. So these levels of trust that we offer to software, the expectation that we have of these pieces of software, of these tools that we use, is pretty incredible. And we're able to evaluate these things because we see longevity, because we see that cloud computing now works pretty consistently. But 10 years ago, cloud computing was in alpha and beta stages. 12 years ago, you were hard-pressed to convince a large enterprise that you would want to put your servers through this level of trust complexity or trust chain. So we know that open source underpins most software today. So who's written a math library that was not for a class? Anybody written a math library for a class even? Oh, you have. Congratulations. We've had a couple of people who have had to write math libraries. Generally, we don't do things like write these underlying components of software because we trust the libraries that are out there, because they've been used for 20 years, because they've been evaluated by experts who are surely smarter than I am. And you see them evaluated by hundreds and thousands of tens of thousands of people who actually make them better. This is one of the principles of open source, is that one of the laws is all, this was an Eric Raymond statement, that all bugs are shallow when you have enough eyes. So this is something that we have to think about, because at the moment, even commercial code is more than 75% open source code by lines of code. So all of those things, someone says NPM include this, NPM include the other thing, NPM include the whole world. That's terrifying, but there are places that this happens. All of that is an example of trust, that those tools will be there forever, that those tools will be accurate, and that they'll do the things you expect them to. So the challenge in this is that currently most organizations can't tell you what's in the software they're shipping. It's getting a little bit better in the last couple of years because we've had some really scary events in open source and in software broadly. Let's not actually single out open source here. But this problem of these dependencies and the trust that is given to these dependencies really, really makes us have to think thoroughly about how we build open source software. So let me start with a premise here. Open source is not free like sunshine. It is not going to always be there exactly as you need it, perfect. You can't demand it to be sunny on a given day, even if there has been rain in the morning, but it's not free like sunshine. You have to think about it as free like a puppy. When you take that puppy home, you need to be willing to train it, to pay attention to it, to submit bugs against the repo it was once housed in, to make sure that you are willing to take it to the vet and do a security audit on it. I'm mixing my metaphors here, so apologies. But the point is that you can't say it's free and there's nothing more I need to do. It is free, and you are responsible for how you use open source software once you bring it into your own piece of code. So, fundamentally, open source is inside almost everything. I've only been a couple of places where I've asked for people to put up their hands and said, who's written a math library? A couple of times it's happened, and people are going, yeah, we did, because we needed it for some reason. But most people rely on the primitives in their languages, in their package ecosystem, and more broadly in open source. So here's the thing. It's not just code. It doesn't live there in a vacuum, because humans build software. I do have a little asterisk up there for the reason that everyone here has probably heard of vibe coding, and that AIs are going to take over the world, eat our software, possibly turn us all into paper clips, and maybe someday be able to build things that we were not able to conceive of. I'm not sure we're there yet. Actually, no, I'm sure we're not there yet. But we need to keep humans in the middle, because until we have longevity across these contracts, we don't know what is being built. We need to be evaluating it, we need to be using it, we need to be responsible for it. So let's presume that humans at least are in the middle of this code building, and we can say they build software. So building software beyond a small project means that we need to build mutual, reliable, truthful, and able communities, as well as the software that we're building. So in this, we need to make sure that we are not only making strong contracts within the way we build our software, but within the groups that we use to build software, or the groups we use to build events, or to build communities, or to share knowledge. So we need to spend some time building trust. One of the easiest ways in open source to build trust is to make no sudden moves. Now, some of you may have run across commentary about activism in open source, where someone makes a change in order to say, use all the CPUs that are in Russia that deploy this piece of code. That would be clever, interesting, activist, but not trustworthy, not something that you need, something you can rely on. And this is one of those spaces where open source has gotten a bit of a bad rap recently, because there has been a lot of activism. There also are the risks of bad actors in open source. So making no sudden moves is an important starting point for how you are able to run communities, projects, and build that long-term reliability, trustworthiness, and integrity. In these groups, documenting decision-making also helps you build trust. Both build trust with the community that you're working with or that you're building with, as well as the community of users who may be consuming this. They understand how decisions were made. They understand what the trade-offs were, how things were concluded. In these communities, you also need to find and reward the behaviors that you want more of. So if someone puts in a pull request and it's great and you just say merge but never reach out to them, never say hi, this is super cool, never reward that human connection, you're going to get less contributions than you might if you're actually spending time rewarding these behaviors that you want to encourage. So rewards can be a variety of things. I usually use the classic 4 of gamification: status, access, power, and stuff. So status would be giving someone a new role or a title within an organization or within a community. Access would be, hey, did you want to meet this super cool person that this person you were really awed by? Giving them access to things, giving access to resources, as we heard just a moment ago, that the Entrepreneurship Society is going to give access to resources. Status, access, power. You can make the decisions. You get to review that code and then merge it when it comes in. That gives you some amount of power in these communities. And then stuff ends up being tribal affiliations, things, objects, so maybe it's stickers. I often say that open source runs on stickers and chocolate, and I use that liberally. Of course, you're all going to say, do you have any stickers today? And I'm sorry, I don't. But usually I'm carrying stickers of some sort or another from a project. But you want to use rewards to help people feel valued in a project. It's a really incredible tool when an individual is trying to engage with the community and then feels that reward, feels seen, feels as if they're being valued for their participation. You also need to make space for creativity. So in these pieces of software, in these open source communities, in these other communities that you build, if you delegate or ask someone to do something, you can't then micromanage and make it be exactly the way you might have done it. You need to leave space for those other people to have their own ideas, have their own ways of coming to a solution, and then be happy with it. Again, thank them for their efforts. Work with them. All of this is building upon a trusted community. Then there are a couple of pieces that are super important here as I sort of wrap up the what do you do to build trust in a community. You need to seek out new perspectives. You are a fairly young crowd on average. So how many of you know about the health app on iPhones? When the health app first came out, it tracked a whole bunch of stuff. It was really cool. But interestingly enough, and possibly, though not guaranteed, possibly because it was mostly a male engineering team, there was no way to track a really important fact of women's lives. There was no way to track a menstrual cycle in this, which is an important health point. But because that team didn't have the perspective of women who would say, hey, this is something we would like to know as relates to our health, it was not included. So you have enormous blind spots when you talk about having singular perspectives or even homogeneous perspectives. So you want to seek new perspectives, and then the hard part happens, because I can bring in someone in who has a very different background or history or gender than me. That's the easy part. But then you need to be empathetic to that experience. You need to listen to it, you need to value it, and you need to understand that where you sit in a social graph gives you incredibly different perspectives. Someone on an edge node, someone way out here that isn't very connected, is going to see things completely differently than someone who is in the center of a cluster, someone who is participating and active in a very different way. Their experiences are going to be incredibly different. So within Kubernetes, when we were building the community, we spent our time trying to establish the values of the community so that we could make better decisions. And some of you who may have heard this talk or heard a different talk yesterday did hear a bit about this. Because setting up values as a tool to make decisions is really important. So within Kubernetes, if we came to a hard decision, and it was like, okay, so we want to make this change, and that actually may end up centralizing control into something. Well, we could go back to the values and say, you know what? We value distribution over centralization. Or somebody says, well, we've always done it that way. I don't think I want to change it. We value improvement over stagnation. And so these values help different projects, different groups of people make decisions without leaning too heavily on singular leaders in these spaces. Now, I've done this value process a couple of different ways and with a couple of different groups. This group is actually the Node.js community coming together, and they're all writing on sticky notes what they think the community stands for. They're all writing, this is important, and I think this is important. And then we ended up clustering, pulling together all of these different things that different perspectives thought was valuable in the community, and coming to a list that ended up representing what was really important to the Node.js community. And this ended up helping us decide that it could be aligned with another community when we were doing work merging two different foundations and the governance around Node.js and another half dozen or dozen projects in the JavaScript Foundation. So being able to identify what is important to you individually, and then being able to identify what is important for the group you are trying to build, actually helps you make decisions. So this ends up being the list of values that they came up with. It was a lot longer than we thought initially, and we distilled it a lot further, but that was some of the conversations we had and some of the distillation that we got. So fundamentally, as you're building a community, and as you're building tools that need to offer this transitive trust from piece of software to next piece of software, from the cloud network to the cloud hardware, to the cloud virtual machine, to the software inside of it. As you need these tools to behave in a consistent manner, you need to build in that same way so that you can show that you value trust in what you're building and show this over time in order to really help us. So I really recommend and know and believe and have fostered that if you build a shared culture in a trusting community and that gives us a resilient organization, that allows us to actually build amazing things. But the key point here is it's amazing because we build them together. And it's amazing and bigger and even more impactful because we have these strong contracts at all of these different trust boundaries, another security term, and we are able to go ahead and expect that our money, when transferred from one bank account to another, arrives there. Because it is no longer based on whether you trust that the teller wrote it down properly in a ledger and then picked up and moved some currency from place A to place B. So we have to have this trust in software. And the only way to get that over long term is to build in a trustworthy manner. So thank you, and please keep building together. I have a bit of homework in case you want to do this during the networking project. I used some of these slides in what was called the Maintainers Leadership Circle for Kubernetes, probably about 5 years ago. And in that, we took a bunch of maintainers from different parts of the project and got them together and said, take a really hard thing that happened in your community and try to break it down. Think through what you really wish you'd known. Think about what was missing in the information as you had it, as the time happened. And then, of course, figure out if there is a principle or a value that could have made this decision or this process clearer to you. And then for fun, since the discussion part was the hard part, frame it in terms of the last sentence of a story. So this may be homework for you all during the networking time if you feel like it, if you want to talk about some interesting stuff. Or I'm also open to questions, because we've got a couple of minutes if we want to do some questions. Okay, I can repeat them too for the live stream, so how about you? We have microphones as well, thank you.
It's a high-tech university.
High-tech universities. Thank you.
Hi, thanks for the talk. I have a question about rewards.
Mm-hmm.
So, what about salary? Everybody has bills to pay.
Yes, no, salary is a very important part of life. Yes, everyone has bills to pay. My country, for sure, has not figured out universal basic income or anything near it. So when I talk about rewards in the context of open source, usually you are working across multiple companies, and so you have no control, or multiple individuals who aren't part of a company. So I would have no control in an open source community over your salary. I could occasionally participate in your performance review if you invited me or your company invited me to participate. But for the most part, when I talk about this trust, I talk about it in terms of influence. But you're right, salary is a great way that development within a single company or single organization that has a unified hierarchy, it's a great tool to incentivize people. Now, there are studies that have shown that many people work on open source software for the freedom, for the orthogonal nature to their day job, if they have a day job, and that it can occasionally really throw out of balance an open source community if a portion of it is drawing a salary and a portion is not, or if you offer rewards for particular features. There's some research on this where it doesn't always go as you would expect. But thanks for the question.
Great, thanks. Can I ask another?
If there are not more questions, could we jump on? We can chat more during the break too. Yeah.
Okay, thanks for the talk. When we started with talking about trust, a question came to my mind immediately that when we talk about trust, what we talk about today, and it's mainly trusting in open source. But it may give the question of, okay, if I'm in open source, how can I build trust to the users of my tool, of my project? Because as an example, Node.js community, Kubernetes communities, all of them are very big, and at least I don't know exactly, most of them are people paid by companies, and they are already employed, creating communities, which is great. But there are communities that are only volunteer-based, and how can people put their trust in the community, and how can they be taken care of?
Generally, that starts with the founder of the project and sharing that vision, being transparent, making no sudden moves, continuing to bring your friends into the project, getting your friends to bring people into the project. It really comes through influence first, and that influence is both on the organization level, but then on the public level out to your potential end users. Sometimes it ends up happening because you put an interesting piece of code into a common package system that already has a community. Sometimes it happens because you give a talk at an event and say, hey, I'm working on a thing. Would you like to join me in this project? Sometimes it happens through adoption of a very large project. So there were some much smaller projects that as Kubernetes got engaged with them, they got much bigger. So it ends up being a lot about that consistency, that presence, that public face of the project at a minimum, but often the project, the founder, and the leaders of it. It's not an easy task.
It's not, I know.
Yeah. Do you want to say what your project is that you're trying to get more attention for?
It's not necessarily me, but I'm contributing to GIMP nowadays, and that's been a project that's been around for longer
GIMP's
than
been
I've
around a long time. Yeah.
And it's still seen only as a cheap replacement for Photoshop.
Yep.
Which it is not exactly.
This ends up being a space for potentially people to advocate on behalf of it and speak or write or show what you've built with it, that kind of thing. It ends up being that balance point of that influence. Yeah. Okay, more questions?
Do we have questions from this
Oh, this side, yes.
The last one.
The last question, okay.
Then we have a dedicated panelist.
Yeah, that's true. We will have more questions right now.
Thank you for the talk. I just have questions about the vibe coding and open source.
Vibe coding and open source. Woo, hot topic.
Yeah, I think it's crazy times. I mean,
Yeah.
my grandmother can actually vibe code right now, so it's crazy.
Yeah, I wouldn't necessarily put your grandma's vibe coded app out on the web right now, though, just in case. Yeah,
She's capable.
she's capable. Okay, cool.
So, like, my question is that what do you think is the impact of vibe coding and open source in terms of negative and positive? I think.
Ooh. Vibe coding on open source. It is a really interesting and contested space right now because some projects have said that they will not allow AI-generated code into them. Not that there's any way to prove this, one way or another. Many of those projects who have said it can't be AI generated also then say, since we can't prove it, you are responsible for this. So you are responsible for the developer certificate of origin saying you have the rights to put this code in, whatever that means in the land of AI. But you also see that, so that's sort of one of the ways that it's showing up. It's showing up as individuals contributing on behalf of something that they say did in Cursor, or they got VS Code to help them fix a bug, whatever. But you are still saying, on my trustworthiness, I am saying I can contribute this code, that I know that it is as good as code that I would write, and that I am offering my transitive trust to this, and the responsibility still falls to you. We have seen some negative impacts in that there are people and projects that are really excited about AI and going around trying to fix a whole pile of stuff and doing automated submissions for bug fixes or error reports or doing bug discovery with AI and submitting issues into open source. And a lot of them are really turning out to be very spammy. They're not super useful. They might or might not actually fix the thing they said that they were trying to fix. It might or might not be a problem. So again, really mixed reviews, fairly frustrated though, for that side. And then I think the third way we see AI impacting open source at the moment is an unknown sense of how this affects trademarks. Not trademarks.
Intellectual property? IP?
Intellectual property. Thank you. I'm like, what is that word? Your IP and the actual ability for you to assign your rights to that piece of code to projects that require rights assignment. So the same problem, to be fair, although at a much slower pace, happened with copy-paste from Stack Overflow. So did you have the rights? Well, there was a human in the middle, and that human attested that this was, that they did have the rights, and then you could or could not figure out at some point later if it was a problem. So those are sort of three places that it's at least a challenge. The thing that I think gives me optimism is this is the absolute worst AI is going to be. Good God, I hope. And it will get better only from here, which is important to consider. But it is not yet something that this is why I framed trust in terms of the human trust of this. Because if you're using AI to do things, that's great. But you still are the person who is responsible for it. There is no deflection of that responsibility. Or if there is a deflection of this responsibility, this is where we get into things like agentic AI. If there's a deflection of responsibility to maybe an agent that is performing these things, how does that even work? One of the things I do is I'm part of a Coalition for Secure AI project, and I'm working on things like, if I set an agent to go do things, does my identity go with the things I asked it to do, and how am I responsible for that? Are they responsible for it? If the tool is responsible, it's really hard to make tools responsible for anything. We know that guns don't kill people, people kill people. We know that crowbars don't break windows, the person holding the crowbar breaks the window. So how do we translate this to an age of AI? And that's a really big open question right now. Thank you all.
Yes. Cool. Then we'll have 20-25 minutes of break, and there's some snacks over there. So go and do some networking, and we'll be back in a minute.